Now we're going to look at how to convert below the line behavior. And we're going to look at Tim Corbin, who coaches baseball at Vanderbilt. This is something that he's learned about shaping the environment.
What you allow will come back either positively or negatively. And I just think the allowance of behaviors, good or bad, is really the setting of what's going to come forward.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at a concrete example of when someone does something that catches you off guard.
Florida called for a personal foul. Misconduct by Kelvin Taylor. This was the gesture.
So that's a very common sports gesture, but in this case, it cost the team a 15-yard penalty. So here's how the coach handled it.
A vitriolic moment afterwards with his head coach.
And so, Chris, if I was going to ask you, what are the pros and cons of that approach, you would say what?
I think one of the pros is I think that behavior is going to end right then and there.
Right.
It's probably not going to happen that game, the rest of the season, certainly with that player and probably the rest of the team.
Efficient, maybe.
Happens fast. It's over and done. The other thing is it could be a little bit of therapy for the coach right there, just getting that off his chest.
And the cons?
Well, I do think the cons far outweigh the pros. I mean, there's going to be some fractured relationships right there, certainly between him and the players. But I see all those guys watching him, and I think in my experience is you could be talking to another student and they experience exactly what's going on, even though it might not be directly to them. So now all of a sudden he's fractured some other relationships in that circle right there, and the rest of the team's going to see it.
And it's hard to ask for poise if you're not modeling it. And if you think about this word, agility, if I was going to ask you to define it, how would you do that?
Yeah, agility to me is to be able to change directions quickly and smoothly.
So if we take what you just said and apply that to social context, that is a required skill, particularly in uncertain times, because how you navigate moments that catch you off guard is where your credibility is going to be earned and lost with the people that you lead. And the goal is to reach competitive maturity, which essentially means that you can be your best authentic self in the most competitive, pressurized environments. So I'd like to show an example of that. You're going to see a clip here of Earl Thomas. This moment in time, it's the 4th game of the year. He's in a contract year. He blows his ACL. And as he's being carted off the field, this is the gesture that he makes to head coach Pete Carroll. After the game, Pete Carroll is asked about this incident. Here's how he responds.
Under the circumstances, to handle what just happened in a flash of a moment, and with all of the knowledge that he knew where he was going, he knows exactly what the injury was. He knew exactly, I'm sure it flashed in his mind, this is going to take this long, and this time, how could this, all of the stuff that's going through his head. You got to give everybody a break. You can have expectations for people to do exactly as you would think they should do, but until you're there doing it and you understand it, you got to give guys some room. And so that's exactly how I feel about it. I know that probably some of our other players know that, and people who've been in the situation understand. And I get it when people want to pass judgment and try to cast aspersions and all that about something. But in the heat of the moment, with all the emotional part of this, and the injury and the pain and the discomfort, all of that, shoot, man, we'll give the guy a break.
So there are some coaches that will watch this and say he doesn't have control over the locker room and he could lose the locker room over this. You would say what?
He even says that. There's going to be some people that cast aspersions on this whole situation, how I'm handling this. I think that's the gold standard of competitive maturity right there. He just killed the story. And it takes so much wisdom, experience, compassion to be able to operate like that, certainly in the emotional environment that comes with sports. But I know, all of us have been in emotional situations that it's very hard to operate with that type of maturity.
And why do you think it actually gains credibility in the locker room?
Well, exactly right. I think it does. I think all the teammates are now seeing This is how our coach basically has our brothers, our players back in this tough situation. He gets it. He's not a player, but he understands what it's like to be in our shoes.
And so many coaches don't do that. In fact, they go to a different tool, the power tools. And if I was going to ask you to define this concept, you would say what?
A power tool is forcing control, simply put.
So anytime you exercise your authority to force control, that's using power tools. And one of the most common power tools you see coaches use?
The number one is playing time. That's the ultimate, trump card, power play in our back pocket.
And there's other things like running sprints, punishment, all these different things are exercising authority. And I want to show you all a clip. This is from Jay Williams. He's a basketball player. He played college basketball at Duke for Coach K, really good culture. Gets drafted in the top 5, goes to the Chicago Bulls, and this is what he observes the first year being in the NBA.
Think about the culture I came from Duke, right? You're there early, you're there late. You dress for the job you want, not for the job you have. A first-class culture, and then you get to the league, and your GM, Jerry Krause, at that time says, hey, look, guys, we need to start approaching this game differently. We want everybody to wear a suit and tie on the bus before every game, mandatory. If not, you're going to get fined $15,000. So as a 21-year-old kid, that's a lot of money. Are you kidding me? And then the first day after he says that, you see your leader, your team captain, Jalen Rose, show up in a camouflage jumpsuit. And you're like, oh, okay, this is a rebellious team-like mentality. And he does it every day. And you start calculating, that's 15, that's 30, that's 45, that's 60, and it doesn't faze him. It's a trickle-down effect.
And you've experienced that when you use power, the more force that you use, it's actually met with more resistance.
Yeah, if I'm the GM on that team, I'm saying, here's my team leader, here's the captain of the team pushing back on this. And so now what? Now it's force with force.
And that never ends well, right? And that's something that NBA coaches understand. Brad Stevens, who coaches the Boston Celtics, I asked him, what is your philosophy on punishment? Think about how you would answer that question. Take a look at his body language right after the question is asked.
Well, punishment generally is not a term that, I'm not a fine fan.
How would you describe the body language?
That he doesn't like your question.
Right.
That you almost catch him off guard. That's not where his mind is in terms of thinking in those terms.
Because it's so far away from where he lives. This is where he lives.
I'm not a big punishment person. We don't run sprints. We don't do any of that stuff. We just want intrinsically motivated guys who are trying to be the best they can be.
So it's very clear that he's operating with a different set of tools. And if I was going to challenge you to define pro tools for a professional approach, how would you define that?
Yeah, it's about winning influence. And you hear Brad Stevens there talk about, I'm just looking for intrinsically motivated players. Aren't we all? Right? So somebody could say, well, he has those guys. And I would push back on that. Even at that level, they're not all like that. He's trying to create that with what we would say is a pro tool, the best use at the pro level to win with influence.
And so if we were going to contrast pro tools with power tools, simply put, what's the difference?
Yeah, I think, using pro tools is partnering with your team, living at the highest level, trying to empower. We're in this together. And, the power tools are, me against you. This is my way or the highway. And that's not to say that we're not going to have rules, regulations, and all those type of things. But I think it's very important to understand the distinction between the two as we move forward.
And simply put, the distinction is pro tools, winning influence, power tools, exercising force, forcing control. And we say professional tools, but that has nothing to do with the level that you coach.
It's just being a professional at your job, the pros, the best of the best, job mastery. And I love that we're getting into the strategies for below the line behavior, because I think this is where it's all at. You know, it's fun to operate above the line and reinforce all these things. This is where the true professionals do come out.
What we'd like to look at is different strategies to convert below the line behavior using influence, winning influence. And the first is to coach the next play mentality. This is a strategy to use in the moment. And great coaches understand that with random events, there are going to be a lot of mistakes that are made.
The game is a game of mistakes. You're going to make mistakes in this game. It's too fast. No one's perfect. But you can't let a mistake lead to another mistake.
And so how do you not let mistakes compound? One of the exercises I did with the team, and I said, what are the events that snag you from being present? And they just wrote out all the different events inside of a game. This was the list that they came up with. What do you see when you see this list?
I see a pretty short list. I could triple that in about 2 seconds. But I love that concept about random events and mistakes. That's life, that's sports, that's the classroom. And so when we're ahead of that thinking, that's the reality we live in, what's the strategy?
And the strategy would be the next play mentality. And I learned this concept from Coach K. He's going to describe it.
You cannot do anything on for the last play. In other words, someone who is always looking in his rearview mirror will never make the most of the current moment. And so the next play is the next moment. So why wouldn't you want to be at your best for the next moment?
Absolutely. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to fix the problem eventually. I mean, we're fixers, we will, but it means calm down. Call the next play. What's the next best move? And we'll get to it later.
And you had that experience when you were an offensive coordinator. You stood up in the box so you can see the whole field. But when you're a head coach, your field vision is not nearly as good.
Yeah, so I'd be calling the plays up in the press box so you can see everybody, correct? Well, what I'm seeing is just a lot of mistakes. So we'd have a play go on and I would be, did you see the receiver miss his block? Nobody else could see it. They're down on the field, but I could see it. And they're like, yeah, coach, we need the next play. Call the next play. What's the next? I'm like, I will, but did you see the next? I'm hoarding plays, right? Did you see the last play? Call the next play, coach. And so I become the head coach, and the process really kind of continues where I can't see anything. And the coordinator saying, the right guard missed his block. Oh my gosh. We're like, call the play. Give us the next move. And so this is a really easy cycle to fall into, but it's also pretty easy to be aware of and fix it.
And we talked about the next play speed. So in that example that you just gave, those extra couple seconds, those compound, and that helps you maximize whatever the game plan is. And once Chris said the play is over, or the game is over, you can assess, is this a one-off situation or is this a developing pattern? And if it's a developing pattern, you can get into some of these other strategies. The next one we're going to look at is to facilitate self-coaching. So a coach approached me and said, we have a really good shooter. He's going to be the best shooter at this prestigious university in the history of their program. Not making any shots. Brett, will you take a stab at him? Sure. Something I learned from Jack Clark was this line, why guess when you can know? And so I try and not have any assumptions when I sit down with people. So when I sat down with this player, I just asked him, how would you coach a teammate that's going through the exact same situation as you are? Can you just take 5 to 10 minutes and write down your words? He did that so he would commit to them. Here's what he wrote down.
You need to quit overthinking things. Start selectively listening to your circle. They're making you second guess everything the coach is saying. You know that you don't just bring value when you score. You do a lot of things to impact the game. When you listen to them, it feels like the only way you add value is if you score. This team needs you to be much more than a scorer. This team needs you to be a leader. When you're thinking about you, you're not thinking about the team, and they see that.
So if the coach comes in and says, look, man, you just need to get extra shots, that's not fixing that. When you see that, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's pretty powerful. You couldn't have coached him any better yourself. And first of all, you don't really even know what the problem is. Why is it always easier to see somebody else's problems than our own and know what the solution is? And so this really easy little tool, I think from old people to young people can fix things themselves sometimes better than we can.
No question. And my challenge with this person was this. I said, if you won't listen to you, why would anyone else? And my job became to support him to take his own advice and trust his experiences. That's how we did it at individual level. Here's how we did it at collective level. This is just a simple miscommunication. So we would pause the clip and just say, how would a championship level team handle this scenario? They give you all the right answers. Move past it, connect, get to the next thing. Then we show them what they did. They're moving on independent of one another. And we're not having to say anything. They're coaching themselves. The next strategy is to align self-interest. If we had transcripts of everyone that we led, if we could see their thoughts, what % of their thoughts would revolve around self-interest versus the greater good of humanity? If I asked you that, what would you say?
Majority of us are all about self-interest.
And unfortunately, what I've come to realize is that self-interest is often stronger than loyalty when you get beyond that small group of people. And I think great coaches understand that. And Tom Izzo, who coaches basketball at Michigan State, this is the biggest mistake he made as a young coach.
I wanted everything because it was right for me, and I didn't spend enough time to understand what they wanted. And that changed really quick, though. My first year, then I started realizing more meetings, get a better feel for what they want, have them explain what they want, so I'm doing it with them. I'm not doing it for me. And I think when you get in college especially, where you're hired and fired on wins and losses, you want to win. But if you got a kid who just wants to play or just wants to be better or maybe just wants to be a pro and doesn't want to win, you better figure that out quick and figure out how, as Judd Heathcote says, every good deal is a good deal for both parties.
Now, here's what's beautiful. When I work with college basketball teams, everyone in the room thinks they're going to play in the NBA. To a man, everyone. So one of the things that I did with a kid who was having a really difficult time integrating in with his teammates is I gave everybody in the room a draft sheet. This looks like the NBA draft board, and on the top, the GM is the general manager. That's where they put their name. And we said, okay, draft this team in order of how you would pick them, and the objective is to win open gym today. So they all wrote them down. Now this kid is a top 10 draft pick according to ESPN when we're doing this exercise. His team picked him 6th. They didn't even have him starting with the starting 5. He picked himself 7th. So I asked him, well, if an NBA, a GM, or a scout came to watch you play, what would you want them to say about you? And he wrote it out, and this is what he said.
He loves the game and can fit into a high-level organization while his skill and experience catch up. He's an elite defender, teammate, and is coachable. All of those things are shown through his responses.
So my job became to build a curriculum for him to help that, because if he did that, that's going to help him with his NBA chances, but it's going to help the current team. The only way you can align self-interest is to know what they want.
Goes back to what Coach Clark was saying, why guess when you can know? You got to ask them, and this is a great way to do that. And then it's creating that win-win. And it doesn't matter the age level, right? Probably the younger that they are, the more you need to align self-interest so they get it. And it's like, this is good for me. I could use that lollipop. That is helping me, and it helps you get them moving in the right direction. But then you go up, in terms of age, and it really comes to be about self-interest. Like, how do we make this being a win-win? And I think sometimes as coaches and teachers, it's all about, this is good for me in my classroom, this is good for me in I know that. But it's not going to be that simple unless you're both having a win-win situation. And sometimes it just comes to dialogue and understanding.
And because we're negotiators and we're asking for their best energy every day, and that's a big ask.
So I think about that. So not only as coaches, you go onto the athletic field, football field, basketball court, and every day you want their best focus, their best energy. But really that's no different than what teachers are asking as well. I want you focused and I want you engaged. And when they walk into your classroom or your locker room and they're not like that, you're like, how can that happen? I'm so ready to go here. Where's your energy? Well, they're the ones that really have to bring it every day. And so when you understand that, I think it changes the mindset.
And whenever that's not intact and this isn't working, we go to the next strategy, which is to develop middle layer management. And one of the great leadership stories that I witnessed was from OU softball. Head coach Patty Gasso has built an incredible program, and this is a very important term for them, championship mindset. And I was meeting with their leadership group, and they were saying that they're having a very difficult time getting the underclassmen to live at the level that they're living at. And they couldn't get them up to that standard. So I challenged them and I said, if your teammates were gonna rank you in these 4 categories from a scale of 1 to 10, how would they rank you? How much do they feel listened to? How much do they feel needed? How much do they feel cared for? How much do they feel appreciated? And it was like they had never thought about those things. They were just trying to force them or bully them into that standard.
This is team building 101, these 4 questions. First of all, what you described, I had every year. The seniors, the juniors, the leadership crew would come to me every year and say, Coach, these young guys aren't listening to us. They're not doing it the way they should. And I would say, well, that's funny. 3 years ago, the old guys were saying that about you. And so you ask these type of questions. And I think it even needs to start with ourselves for our people. This is the basics. Does anybody in your environment feel like they're listened to, needed, cared for, appreciated? And so it starts with us. And then, maybe the leaders in your room, if they're doing that to the people that aren't getting it, and they go after them with these 4 techniques to make sure that they feel important, I think everything changes.
And if you ask Brad Stevens what's the best way to change undesired behavior, he would say, I rebound for the guys. So if he sees something not going according to plan, he stays after practice, and through sweat equity, they eventually come to him with the issues, and then he can nudge them in the direction they need to go.
I might write that down and blow it up as a sign to put on my mirror every day. I mean, I think that can almost start your mentality for like catching below the line behavior. That we know it's going to happen. So when that happens, what am I going to do? Like, I got you. I'm going to make sure I do everything in my power with a strategy to get you above the line. I know it's going to happen. I got you. And I'm going to get you on the right track. What an awesome leader that he would be to think that way.
And that leads us into the last strategy for converting below the line behavior, which is reteaching. And a teacher asked a class to alphabetize this order. And here's how one of the students did it. What does that show us? Everyone interprets things differently. And that's why PJ Fleck says one of the best lessons he learned teaching 5th graders was how to teach the same thing 100 different ways. And you have a good story on that.
And sometimes it comes down to that. Like you might have to get to 100 to get to certain students, to certain people that don't understand this. I was a young coach and I was the wide receiver coach. And one of my responsibilities is it's day 1 type stuff that you have to teach them how to align correctly. And if you don't, you're going to get a penalty. So we're in about game 4, and sure enough, the same guy that I can't really reach on this basic stuff aligns wrong, and we get another penalty. And my coach, who was a mentor, one of the most unbelievable leaders, so passionate and poised and kind, never lost his temper, walks up to me and he's in my face, because I look at him after I've told him a bunch of times, this is on the mentality, that's on him. I told you he's kind of a dumb guy. He's in my face. He says, I'll tell you, I could teach my yellow lab how to get on and off the ball. This is on you, not on him. Teach him a different way. And after 30 years, that has stuck with me. And anytime I think something simple's going on, I'm like, why can't this guy get this? I think about that story, and I think about my coach coming back and kind of putting that back on me. And it really changed how I think about teaching anybody anything. It's my issue, not theirs.
And really, coaches want feedback. And all we have to do is look at what's happening in front of us. And if it's going according to plan, that's our feedback. If it's not going according to plan, that's our feedback on what we need to do. So these are some of the strategies that could get you thinking around how to convert below the line behavior. And really the question you have to ask yourself, there does have to be an enforcement mechanism, and discerning when do you use force, when do you win influence. That's gray area. And I love one of your comments. You said that our job is to win them over or weed them out.
And I think when we look at these two boxes like this, they're not equal boxes. I think our job is to win them over. We're doing everything in our power to get them believing in how we do things and the correct ways, and all of our mindset goes to that. But I do think there's a time where that's just not going to work. And this thing you can remove them from an activity, a drill, but there may be a time when you have to remove them from the team. And those were always the hardest, worst days, toughest days for me before and after when that day was coming. I just felt terrible in my stomach. But I also felt like that was one of my most important responsibilities to everybody else in the group, to make sure that if we can't get this right, it's not going to bring everybody else down.
And we are at our best when we can do this, win influence. And I guess my challenge for you to end on is, what is your biggest takeaway with below the line behavior as it relates to the power dynamics?
Yeah, I think about winning influence, about when do I really have to go to the force mechanism. I think that's one thing. I think all these strategies are about rebounding and getting them above the line and putting it on us, and how can we help them. It's just much more.
It's about partnership.
It is a partnership. That's what we're there for. And, it may not be the quickest way, but it's the best way. And and this is what it's all about, performing in the storm when it's not right. And this is when, the true professionals, the masters of their craft, come out, when they can operate when it's not just right, and rebound and get their students and their players above the line.
So well stated. And I would challenge you all to think about the different strategies you would use. And maybe you can look at ours as a starting point, not an exhaustive list, but just one to frame your thinking to figure out what is it that we can do to win influence and convert below the line behavior.